Axios decided that we wanted to do this programming regardless of whether or not we had support, because it upholds our mission and we care. But with that said, we really do appreciate the support of all of the people who are making this possible. Morin Insights and Futurum, and then of course Claire from Qualcomm, thank you. So with that, I want to introduce our first guest. This is a person whose name has become synonymous with press freedom because of the work that he led in getting Evan Gershkovich free from Russia. Round of applause. Please help me in welcoming Almar Latour, who is the publisher of the Wall Street Journal and the CEO of Dow Jones. Almar.
Wow, I thought the Journal House was buzzing, but wow.
Journal House was excellent. We visited earlier.
Yeah.
It's a very different Davos this year than last. You had Evan's parents with you last year and making the case to bring him home. And after 16 months, you and the Journal and the US government brought him home. I want you to reflect on what it took to get him there, because I don't think many people realize how much the Journal had to do behind the scenes. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. First of all, thank you for putting a spotlight on this topic. And the answer to this question starts with a thank you to you, because the first ingredient and the most important ingredient was collaboration, solidarity, and getting that message out, putting a spotlight on a very, very difficult situation and being consistent about that. Hostage taking actually happens a lot in the corporate world, relatively speaking. And one of the hardest things is for companies to stick with it over time. And so that's a challenge. What happened? What did we do? We basically set up an internal company that focused on Evan's release. Communications being a critical part of that, a big legal arm. Where we needed additional legal help, we got outside legal help. We conducted quiet diplomacy, public diplomacy. Advocacy from the newsroom was the cornerstone of all of this. Making sure that we created a special lane, because we're in a peculiar position as a journalistic organization, a special lane for journalism, so that our journalists could actually report on this independently, could be critical of the actions that we would take as an organization as well. And so all those things came together. We also decided you cannot spare any resources on this. That had to be very clear from the start. And that seems to make sense, but in a company there's always dollars and cents, and so we never wanted to have that kind of atmosphere. Working very, very closely with his family. You do not understand what this is unless you look somebody in the eye and see the suffering that the hostage taking causes. And unfortunately, we see that way too often today. So many, many things that happen. Thousands of people really helped get this to a good conclusion. And now so we hope to forget about that case and focus on this very pressing issue that just persists and it's getting worse.
Yeah, and in the work that you guys did, one example that always sticks out to me was that the Journal had to fight to make sure that Evan's bank accounts weren't shut down, that his Gmail would be there when he got back, things that you wouldn't think of. When you talk about setting up almost something like a separate company within the Journal, that infrastructure, does that still exist today, or is that something that only happens temporarily when a hostage situation happens?
Well, the spirit of that is the most important element, and that still exists. And we are looking as to where we can focus all that energy. With the exception of some of the external contributors, that nucleus still gets together. We still talk about press freedom with some regularity, mainly with Chief Legal Counsel and myself, Emma. But we also sadly have been prompted to focus on new cases that makes this very important. We put a spotlight on Jimmy Lai, for example, in Hong Kong quite frequently.
And then just in terms of the outside collaborators, what role did other news organizations play in helping you bring Evan home? And do you think that has brought you together in a way that you maybe weren't as close before?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was, in fact, so incredibly important. And also, there's a very intense competition, as you know. But getting that level of solidarity, and I think that really came together exactly a year ago here, where a lot of media organizations were gathered, like they are today, and people shared their values and offered their support. Evan's case was a global case in that there were many countries involved in ultimately getting this massive hostage swap off the ground. And that made Davos in this case, and also many news organizations around the world, disproportionately important because we needed Germany to cooperate, we needed other countries to cooperate. And so that's not something that the Journal did, that happened really as a collective. It happened with leadership as well. In SPIHA, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, the National Security Council, et cetera.
And one thing, just so everyone here should know, we were going to have A.G. Sulzberger, the publisher of the New York Times, sit down with us. He's sick, so he wasn't able to come to Davos, but we wanted to have him here because his work with Almar was something that's so passionate of his. You mentioned Jimmy Lai, and I want to understand from you, obviously we know that Russia is a dangerous place right now for journalists. What other places around the world, I assume China is one, that you're focused on as being places where you have to focus on press freedoms a little more?
Yeah, well, it's very clear recently in Iran, of course, there was a similar situation that got resolved much more quickly, but in the past that hasn't happened so quickly. For us as a news organization, we've traditionally had a lot of exposure to Asia and to China. We care deeply about that. We have a lot of staff in Hong Kong, so we have to think protectively about their safety. And we've seen, particularly there, with the national security law, things getting much worse. Jimmy Lai, for example, was detained pretty much indefinitely with unclear charges and is going through a very difficult situation right now.
And so what role will you play and will the Journal play in advocating for press freedom in those types of places? Do you play the same kind of role even if you don't personally have someone from your newsroom being held hostage?
Well, we stand ready to contribute when people call on us, and we have been called on here and there. So the first part of when there is a crisis like this, it often takes place in quietude. Ours, with Evan, we didn't have a choice because the Russians put out a press release about this, and therefore it became public from moment one. But you want to have some time to calibrate and to prepare your resources. We're advocating on our opinion pages. We're speaking about it. The attention is incredibly important. We have other resources as well.
And then speaking of Russia, like where do things stand now with how you feel about having journalists in Russia?
Well, we don't. So, I mean, that's, for us, we are very proactively, Emma Tucker's newsroom is very proactively covering the Ukraine crisis. We cover the Russian story, but we have to be very careful with our staff. Yeah. And then several, I don't know if you saw this, but a few months ago, a little bit longer than that, but several of our reporters were put on a watch list from Russia, including Emma Tucker herself. So we have to be exceedingly careful there.
When you think about the resources that something like this requires, obviously there's a lot of funding that's got to be involved. How are you thinking about fundraising to make sure that not just the Journal has the money to fight for this, but other news organizations globally?
Yeah, I think all of us can do our part. You can contribute as an individual. You can help fundraise for major organizations. You name them, CPJ, PEN, many others. And you can do quiet fundraising, which we've also done. You don't always have to go to a gala to raise funds. One of the things that I find particularly powerful is to bring people together, the convening power of this and speaking about this and bringing people who have gone through this together with potential funders, people of great influence. And so doing that quietly or doing that loudly can be very, very helpful.
I think the Free Evan campaign, in part because of what you described, you were forced to speak to it publicly because Russia made it pretty public, was very viral. It was one of the first times I saw a hostage campaign to free a journalist really reach the mainstream and zeitgeist. Was that something that you expected and worked to make happen, or was that a happy byproduct of the work that you did?
I mean, which came first? Virality, I guess, happens, but we certainly were hoping for it, and we gave it our everything to get it out there. But it's really the people and other media organizations that decided that this would get the attention that it would.
And then, I don't want you to speak on behalf of Evan, but I'm curious, if you've spoken to him about the process, like what was his vantage point on the work that you were doing behind the scenes? Are there things that he thought you could do better or improve, or are there things that he thought that you all did very well?
Oh, I'm sure there are many things that we could have done much better. Looking back at any process, whether he was successful or not, could it have been shorter? Where did we drop the ball along the way? I'll leave that for him to cast that judgment. He's working, as everyone knows, on a book, but it's really his turn to speak now that he's got freedom of expression back. He's going to use it, and I want to really leave that to him.
When we talk about some of the punitive measures taken around the world to target journalists, I think there's a conversation, and I also wanted to have this conversation ahead of this next administration around what is press freedom going to look like in the U.S. The Journal is such a global organization, but we're seeing that some of the tactics of leveraging criminal law to go after journalists, there's concern about those types of things ever happening in our own country. How are you thinking about press freedom looking ahead at the next few years? Is there something that you will do differently? Will you stay the course the same way?
Well, first, the global situation, 120 journalists were killed last year, 361 journalists, according to CPJ, were put in prison. And that was the worst year, according to that organization, since they started measuring the aggression against freedom of press. And so things seem to be getting worse, which means we need to be on high alert around the world. As to litigation as a weapon that has existed for a long, long, long time, the Journal specifically has a long history with that, internationally, but also domestically. And I think we should take it with a cool head and one step at a time. I don't think hysteria or crystal ball gazing helps in that regard. We've got a top-notch legal team, but a lot of this also starts with the reporting has got to be unimpeachable. It's got to be unbiased. It's got to be reliable. And so investing in that and making sure that our standards, our values, including free press, are honored every day and that trust is earned every day. I think that will also help in a climate where certain where it's perhaps more difficult to get difficult stories out there.
Yeah, and then putting on your CEO hat for a second, coming up with more legal resources and more resources to help with hostage situations, that requires investment. So how do you think about ramping up those investments when clearly there's also investments that need to be made in the journalism themselves? It's not just legal representation in terms of lawyers, but people to protect from cyber threats and all of those types of things.
Well, clearly, certainly cyber, which requires a technological investment, there that you can earmark, and you don't want to do that post facto. We know that cyber is a massive threat. When it comes to legal, I think that is still on a case-by-case basis, but it's in a separate lane. So we're never going to. We're very lucky as a news organization at this moment to have the resources, and so we're not forced to think. And I think it's somewhat sinister to say, "Oh, I'm going to double the legal resources in anticipation of." We don't want to invite anything either. Yeah.
And then, just the final thing. Obviously, this is a tough topic, and you had a tough year. Is there something that you think about that makes you optimistic that this will get better, or that we're going to be able to handle these types of threats to press freedom better in the future?
Yes, I think so. I think the level of collaboration, the spotlight that we've all put on this has become part of the national conversations, become part of the global conversation. And so I think that is inherently a positive thing. I also see so many new news organizations rise, and I think that is healthy too. There's a greater attention to quality news these days than even just a little while ago. So very pleased to see that.
And then do you have any hopeful thoughts for how we should be thinking about working with the Trump administration for the next 4 years? I think there's a lot of concerns around some of the lawsuits. Anything that you think makes you hopeful that it might not be as much of a risk to press freedom as one might think?
I would say cover it like you would any story and take it one day at a time.
That's incredible advice and a great place to land. Just some place to land, I want to just go through some of the things that we learned from Almar today. The key idea here is collaboration. And I'm sorry that AG couldn't join us, but the fact that he was so excited about sitting with Almar speaks to that level of collaboration. Setting up that sort of temporary unit or company within the company to focus on this, it not only allowed your journalists to cover it independently, but it allowed you to bring a lot of focus to getting Evan the resources that he need. Working closely with the family, being able to look them in the eye brings a whole another level of the importance of how this is going to impact people. We talked about where else there are threats other than Russia, where unfortunately you still don't have journalists. You mentioned Iran, you mentioned China and the Jimmy Lai case. I think we're all going to be hoping for the best with Jimmy Lai. When I asked about sort of the funding and what you're going to think about helping others globally, you said you were standing ready to contribute when you need to, which I think is important. And then the stats that you shared from CPJ are really alarming. 120 journalists killed last year, obviously many of those in the Israel-Gaza war, 361 journalists jailed. It's an unprecedented time, but you said what's most important is to keep a cool head and not be hysterical. And I think that's why we're having this conversation. So Almar, Latour, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone. We have one more conversation. We're just going to switch up the chairs a little bit, but don't go anywhere. I'll be back in about a minute and a half.
Joining our panel?
No, just the two. All right, everyone. Our next set of guests also need no introduction. We have somebody who is at the forefront of pioneering the future of journalism and really taking a good look at how AI can be used to make journalism better, but is also clinical about and clear-eyed about some of the challenges. And then we also have somebody who is making a big swing at making the internet a safer place. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Frank McCourt and Nick Thompson from The Atlantic. Frank, we're going to start with you because there's a lot going on right now with TikTok. And as all of you probably are aware, Frank has gathered an investment group with commitments of $20 billion to buy TikTok. Can you tell me a little bit more about who is in that investment group? I've heard Kevin O'Leary, but I think folks want to understand how serious you are. I think they want to know who else you're working with.
Yeah. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. The 20 billion is not coming from Kevin O'Leary. And I'll tell you why. I think Kevin is a really good partner in this endeavor. But it's basically coming from all the major investment firms that you would imagine. The PE firms, large family offices, and alternative asset managers. In addition to that, we anticipate that the existing investors in ByteDance will want to roll over their investment in a spun-off U.S. TikTok. So capital, there's oodles of capital here. That's not the issue at all. It's really the politics of this that's very challenging. Regarding Kevin, he called me. He had expressed an interest because he has an audience of small businesses because of his Shark Tank franchise, which is now 17 years in. And there are between 6 and 7 million small businesses on TikTok, and that he views that as his audience. And you obviously want to keep those businesses on TikTok once we buy it. And so he called me. He said, "Look, I've talked to all the potential bidders. Anybody that's raised their hand, you're far and away ahead of everyone. If it sells, I believe you're going to get it. Can I join the bid?" And that's how it happened.
And have you been in touch with ByteDance about the deal?
We have been in touch with ByteDance through bankers. ByteDance is silent right now, other than acknowledging receipt of our offer, which, by the way, was the only offer that went to DOJ and got approved and was ready to, if ByteDance signed it, was ready to go and extend the legislation for 90 days. For those of you that are familiar with that, you know there was a one-time extension that was available. But ByteDance, continued to insist that they were going to play out their legal remedies. As most of you know, they lost at the Supreme Court. And now I think they're just waiting to see what President Xi decides to do, because ByteDance is a different kind of company because it has a so-called golden share where CCP has the ultimate say. So we're waiting. It's super interesting. I will tell you that I just spent 3 days in Washington, and Congress is united. They really are very, very united about this issue. They're super concerned about the national security issues, and they take a great deal of pride in their legislation. And right now, they've had 12 judges uphold it and 0 not, when you add the appellate judges to the Supreme Court justices.
I just want to ask one more question before we move on to Nick. There have been a few other folks saying that they're interested in a bid. Mr. Beast today saying that he would join Jesse Tinsley's bid. Would you ever consider just merging all of those efforts? Or do you think it's better to have competing parties all trying to go for this asset?
Yeah, so Mr. Beast has talked to all of us. So I won't, Mr. Beast is going to be a part of this bid too. So he's very entrepreneurial, let's put it that way. We welcome everyone. We didn't start Project Liberty 5 years ago to buy TikTok. We started Project Liberty to change how the internet works and change it in a fundamental way. So rather than being surveilled, have your data scraped, have it aggregated and algorithms applied to it, that sure, they sell you things and feed you news, but they also manipulate you and trigger you and so forth. We think the internet should be operate differently, where everybody should own and control their identity, their data, and their relationships. That's possible. That technology is built and operating with nearly 2 million people using it now. We need scale for it to be relevant. The TikTok opportunity was very serendipitous. We're buying TikTok to move the 170 million people and their data to this new upgraded internet. And we're not interested in the Chinese technology or the algorithm. And by the way, the legislation forbids a buyer from owning any of the co-hosting the data or any of the, they must disentangle completely from the Chinese technology. So any buyer that says, hey, look, I want to buy it, this is great, and this and that, and I'm going to make a deal with ByteDance. No, they're not. They're in the Supreme Court decision, you don't have to read it all, just read pages 5 and 6, makes it crystal clear that to comply with the law, you must disentangle 100% from the Chinese technology.
So then what are you even buying?
You're buying a massive user base and a massive archive of data and a brand.
So Nick, hearing that, buying users and a brand, do you think that, just given where you've sat, you were the editor of Wired, you're obviously a super technology follower, do you think that there is a path forward for somebody like Frank if you don't have access to the algorithm that made TikTok what it is?
Oh, absolutely. You can just reverse engineer it as best you can. Actually, the notion that the TikTok algorithm is something that is so much more intelligent than all other social media algorithms, I don't think actually explains their success. Their success comes from their incredible genius in the way they set up the structure and the way they set up the reward mechanisms and the way they made it possible for any individual who didn't already have a following to pop if they made something great, and then the incentives that flowed down from that. I don't think there's a magic algorithm. I think if you buy the assets, put an algorithm on top of that, AI works pretty well. You know, you can just type in ChatGPT, make me a new algorithm. I really think you could do it.
Wow. And so then you just mentioned AI and ChatGPT. Like, obviously, TikTok's future is coming at a time where there's a lot of uncertainty around technology, including AI. I think the publishing industry is at the forefront of the conversation around this confusion because of the copyright issue. The Atlantic has struck a few deals with AI companies. And I'm curious why you chose to do that when others, like the New York Times, have instead opted to fight in court.
Well, a couple things. So I think with every AI company and every media company, there should be a fair exchange of value. In fact, I was thinking about it in like an ethical way today. I was hosting a panel on ethical AI, and trying to build ethics into an AI system that was built on stolen data is complicated. And so I do think there needs to be a fair exchange of value. So the question is, what is the leverage point to have a fair exchange of value? You can sue and say, pay us, right? You can make a deal and say, we'll let you train on us if you pay us, right? You can try to partner with them. Like the exchange of value with Google over years was they drove us traffic, we gave them our content. So with every AI company, we are trying to figure out a fair exchange of value.
Or you can have an internet where people own their data and permission its use.
I mean, if you change the whole structure, yes, then it's different. But in the internet that we live in now, we have to choose different strategies with these AI companies, and we have to figure out what the different leverage points are. So we made a deal with one. Who knows? You know, the door is open to sue any of them. We're going to surely make deals with more of them. Pro Rata is this amazing company that is trying to sort of, they're not like a traditional large language model. They are a company that is trying to reverse engineer the way LLMs work so that the content that is contributing to an answer can get compensation. So that's just like, they're trying to solve the problem. So of course we're going to partner with them.
So the question then becomes, yes, this fair value exchange is important, but in the past, media companies thought they were getting a fair value exchange from firms like Facebook and Google that were paying them millions of dollars to produce content, and then they just pulled the rug under their feet and they just stopped paying. So do you have a concern that once OpenAI gets the insights and data that they need from you, you're useless to them and then they leave you dry?
Yeah, of course that's a risk, and you manage that risk in the contract, right? The term of the contract, the way the contract works. On the question about Facebook, it's really interesting because there were media companies that really got screwed by Facebook, right? Particularly with Facebook Watch. And they were media companies that trusted Facebook to continue the platform, that hired people to produce content specifically for Facebook. It wasn't Facebook amplifying stuff that was already being done. It was creating stuff for Facebook. And then Facebook changed its strategy and they were left high and dry. There have also been very good deals with Facebook. Do you know the number one way that we drove subscriptions at The Atlantic this very day? Facebook ad arbitrage, right? Like we work incredibly hard to put stories into the Facebook advertising engine with a very effective CPA. Like we work really hard at this, right? And it is a huge part of our success. Now, is Facebook going to pull the rug out from us? Maybe they'll cut us off from the platform. Maybe they'll like, wait, The Atlantic's getting a lot of subscriptions from Facebook and they're writing mean stories about us. They'll like cut us off or rig the algorithm. Maybe, maybe not. But we're going to use this opportunity as it is right now because as it exists, we can pay less than $70 to get somebody to subscribe to The Atlantic for $70. So we're making a lot of money off Facebook today.
I think, Nick, what you're describing is this dilemma that's not just publishers, but it's also creators. You saw this panic, Frank, on Sunday, where creators who are built their entire businesses on TikTok, huge, massive, millions of people, audiences, thought that it was all gone overnight. And so I think with your bid, my question is, like, how do you ensure that creators are going to have a platform that is just as good, just as effective, just as sustainable, when I think there's a lot of creator distrust in anyone that owns a social platform after what happened last week?
Yeah, so when we were thinking of making the bid, one of the first things I did was ask to Mike and the team at Project Liberty to pull together 20 influencers, and because I wanted to know what they thought about TikTok and what they liked and didn't like. So we had a amazing dinner, 3-hour dinner in Malibu, and these were really, really smart young people that were comparing notes and ideas. I came away with a few learnings. Number one, they don't love it. Why? For two reasons. They produce a piece of content. Now, and remember, TikTok is based on content, not followers, right? It's a content graph as opposed to social graph, technically. And they produce a piece of content. Everybody loves it. They're famous. They're happy. They produce a similar piece of content. They think they're going to stay famous and stay happy. Nothing happens. And they don't know why, because they have zero visibility into the algorithm. Some are even shadow banned because they might be doing something that whoever's controlling the algorithm may not like. And so they get shadow banned. The second thing is that unlike the other social media platforms where individuals know they develop a following, right? And friends, followers, likes, etc. That's not TikTok. So TikTok influencers have no idea who their following is. So they're doing all this work. They don't know who their audience is, or who their fans are, or who their customers are. So they would like to know that. So imagine an internet where the individual, the influencer, owns those relationships. And imagine an internet, by the way, if we do a really lousy job running TikTok, they can pick them up and move them somewhere. You can't do that with Instagram. You can't do that with TikTok. They own the platform. So we need an internet, I believe, where the individual is permissioning the use of their data for AI models, is able to own the relationships that they've built and cultivated, be able to move them, and have apps that interoperate just like phone numbers interoperate on phone carriers. The tech is not complicated. I mean, it's complicated, but it's not rocket science. I mean, it is a fixable problem, and we've proven it because we have 2 million people using it. The issue is, how do you get people to be aware of it and choose to migrate to it? And this is where the TikTok bid has been massively helpful at elevating what Project Liberty is trying to say and what we're trying to do. Because we can sit and moan and groan about the harms of the internet and social media all day long. But the question is, I hear my mom's voice like, okay, what are you going to do about it? That's where we're at. Fix it. It's fixable. It doesn't have to be like this, rather than dealing with all these problems incessantly.
I gotta say, Frank, I love watching your TikTok purchase. Amazing. I'm gonna love even more when you move everybody onto a blockchain-based, permission-based, license your own data, portable follower system. It's gonna be amazing.
170 million people. Frank, you mentioned shadow banning, and one thing that's interesting about that is a lot of people claim they're shadow banned, but in reality, they had violated the policies of a platform in some way. They just didn't realize it. And so when it comes to you owning TikTok, you're going to have to make some decisions around what are your policies? What are your content moderation decisions? Like, where do you personally fall on those types of things in terms of regulating for safety versus free speech? Are you more in the camp of somebody like Elon, who believes that free speech should sort of trump content moderation efforts? Or are you more in the camp of there's more that platforms need to do to make sure that we are policing speech and keeping users safe?
I'm kind of neither. I'm in the camp of I'm not in a position, nor is any other a person who controls a platform, should they be in a position to decide for all of us what is our free speech policy, our privacy policy, our moderation policy. The point we're trying to make over and over again is that we need technology that is actually optimizing for what we as society want for these policies. What we have right now is a few people deciding what. I mean, Zuckerberg changed his mind overnight about a moderation policy, right? That affects 1 billion people. That's not democracy, is it?
So you think that should be like a law or regulation that dictates what all of you do?
No. People should have optionality about what apps operate in a way that they're comfortable. And from a policy objective, of course, we need to make sure that the technology is actually resonant with and in harmony with the rules and laws we already have. I mean, Sarah, how many times have you heard people say, oh, we need a digital Bill of Rights? And I said, no, we don't. We need a technology that honors the Bill of Rights we have. We have policies. We just need technology that's not in conflict with them. So I believe in giving people, individuals, the power, essentially, not the platforms. There's a difference, obviously, when the data is going to Beijing versus Silicon Valley. But the difference isn't as large as you think, because a centralized, surveillance-based autocratic technology works very well if your political ideology is okay with surveillance and centralized control and autocracy. That's not what democratic societies are built on. So we need technology that starts with the human agency. You know, if we're going to have democracy and freedom and liberty and permission and choice and autonomy, we need technology that embraces those values, and that starts by taking the control control isn't up here. It's not Frank decides when he buys TikTok what the algorithm is, or Frank decides what the moderation policy is. It's the other way around. It's imagine you all having control of your identity and your data and your relationships. And then it works from there. It sounds a lot more like democracy, right? Where people are empowered. That's the whole point of democracy. But we have tech that's very much at odds right now.
So, Nick, I hear that. And the question that I have is, okay, so in empowering people to make those choices, do you give them tools so that they can decide what goes in the feed and what doesn't go in the feed, what they get to see and what they don't, what keywords and hashtags they will tolerate and see in their feed or not? Or do you do something like community notes where you let the user base sort of police it? Those to me seem like the two options to adhere to what Frank is talking about. What's your view?
No, my view on content moderation, first of all, I don't think that any of the people who talk the loudest about free speech don't actually believe in free speech, right? Look at how many journalists Elon Musk has sued. Look at all the stuff Elon Musk has shut down. If you believe in free speech, you believe in open sharing about ideas. He's rigged the Twitter algorithm to have his posts appear more than anybody else's. By the way, tools, if you block the word Musk and you block the word Elon and you block Elon, it makes Twitter much better. But in general, if you want to have a social media feed, I do think that what you need is you need a set of tools, right? You need moderators. I think community notes are great, but they're slow and they're supplemental. So if I were put in charge of Facebook's moderation system or Twitter's moderation system or the TikTok one, I would set a bunch of algorithms to knock out stuff that's unsafe. I would allow users to sort of set a dial that is their own preference on this, but there's certain stuff that violates no matter where you set the dial. And then I would add community notes because I think it's a great supplement.
Sarah, just one point. One of the things I think we're in a very interesting space right now, kind of just as society, and I think that the TikTok thing has been great at accelerating certain conversations. A blue sky, okay, a project that's emerging, you're hearing more and more about. There's over 50,000 algorithms available for blue sky users. So we think we can think of the existing paradigm and how do you mitigate harm and make it better. That's one thing. We need to do that because that's what we're in right now. But we should also be creating headspace for the next version of the internet, which can address these problems in the design. And that's something it's a little bit difficult to balance both. But Nick's talking a lot about how do you make the existing better, and I'm talking a lot about how do you fix the infrastructure to make it all better.
Nick, we have just a few minutes. I want to, final thing to you, understand a little bit about your views on this copyright fight with publishers and AI. The idea for most publishers is that the current copyright law does not say that AI companies have fair use of their content. AI companies obviously don't agree with that. Do you think that the news industry should be, pushing to interpret it in a certain way, or do you think that the current law exists fine as it is, and that you just need to be brokering these types of deals?
So today there's an interesting story where DeepSeek, new Chinese open source model trained on relatively low energy, low token model, surpassed many of the top American LLMs. And one of the ways they did it is they trained on OpenAI's data. So they would go into ChatGPT and ask queries and then train on that. So they created a whole bunch of synthetic data. And the tech industry is like, oh my God, that's unfair. That violates OpenAI's terms of service. I'm like, So on your question, so there is a legal question, right? And the legal question is whether what they did constitutes fair use. And there's a 4-part test of fair use. And you talk to a lot of copyright lawyers, it is entirely unclear. The AI companies say it's transformative, right? That's one of the tests of fair use. Clearly, we've transformed. We're not completely replicating it. We say, well, look at all that they took. They're building a competitive business model. It's unclear where that goes. So the courts will decide that question. To the second part of your question, it would be so much better if Congress got involved, right? Or if the European Union set specific legislation on copyright that then the AI companies had to follow, right? And there are some movements towards this in the EU, right? Transparency, so at least we know what they've trained on. Specific rules and requirements about what they're allowed to scrape and what they're not allowed to scrape. So there are a bunch of different leverage points. Winning a lawsuit is one. Getting legislation is another. A really great one that happened in Davos this week is Matthew Prince of Cloudflare saying that he will, by default, stop AI scrapers who are violating publishers' rights from doing it at the CDN level, which is kind of amazing. There's a whole bunch of options and places where we have leverage points to sort of force this fair exchange of value. Winning a copyright case is one, changing the law is another.
Amazing. And Frank, want to just end on you a little bit more about your bid. There's a ByteDance board member who was speaking to Axios today, Bill Ford, and he told my colleague Dan Primack that he doesn't even think anyone can start negotiating a bid until Scott Bessent is confirmed as Treasury Secretary, until we have more clarity for China. Like, do you agree with that, or do you think that you should be moving forward now with the uncertainty?
Well, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and over the years, my experience is what you do is you put yourself in the best possible position to succeed. If you use a sports analogy, it's hanging around the hoop, right? You get yourself together to do it, and then you see what happens. We don't know what ByteDance is going to do. We don't know what President Trump is going to do. We do know what the legislation says, and so we'll see. And it may turn out that it will never be sold, and it will be shut down as it was in India. But my bet from day one has been that the government's case would prevail. That's turned out well. And the second is that when, at the end of the day, ByteDance will sell you as TikTok without the Chinese technology. And if you don't have a tech stack to move the user base and the data over to, you're not a bidder.
And then last thing, Donald Trump has alluded to the two people that he thought could be great to get in on a bid, which are, allies of his, Larry Ellison and Elon Musk. If it came down to it, and the opportunity for you would mean you having to partner with either or both of them, would you take it?
If there was an agreement on the values and principles of what I'm talking about here. So in other words, if it was, hey, let's just go buy TikTok and replicate TikTok, reverse engineer an algorithm and scrape everybody's data and use it and so forth, I have zero interest if I could have it for free. So if, on the other hand, Larry Ellison and Elon Musk wanted to actually say, you know what, we agree everybody should own and control their data, and they should have agency, and they permission its use, and the internet should be interoperable, and we should, for the first time, be on the internet, not our device. Our IP address is our device. We're not on the internet, our device is. That's why it's machine-centric. So if they shared a set of principles and values, which are non-negotiable for Project Liberty, then I'm all in with them, because the rest is just commercial, and you can make any kind of trade you want.
Frank, if that happens, I will eat my shoe.
And then Frank, last thing is,
next year we'll all be here with Nick chewing
shoes
on his shoe.
TikTok's been valued at anywhere between 20 billion and 80 billion. You've said that you received about 20 billion in commitments. Is that still the number? Do you have more? And let's say ByteDance does come back and they say this is a $100 billion asset. Like, what does that mean for the future of your bid?
It's not a $100 billion asset. And so if we get to that point where it's like a willing buyer and a willing seller, you have a negotiation and you can't just make up numbers, right? So ByteDance, there is a bookend to this. ByteDance, you can buy shares of ByteDance on the secondary market now at a valuation with a 200 billion plus number in front of it for the entire company. If we're talking about less than 10% of the company. Okay, U.S. TikTok represents about 8%. So, and we're talking about buying that piece without the technology. So to kind of do the mental exercise of what would the value be. Now, it could be a very valuable asset, but it's going to take time to actually transition the user base and the data and actually have it operate in the way I've described. But this is a very, very unique opportunity to solve a national security issue and help fix the internet and actually begin the third generation of the internet where you all are in charge.
And I give you credit, Frank, because these are tough and big and existential problems to solve, and you are taking a big swing at it. So we appreciate you. Just a few things that we learned today. We talked about who's in on your bid. You said it's all the major investment firms and a lot of the existing investors in ByteDance. I did not know that, so that is new to me. You also said Jimmy Donaldson, Mr. Beast, would be interested or is working with you. That was also news to me. You're in touch with ByteDance through bankers, but obviously it's been quiet in this past week because there's been a lot of changes. When we talked about broader tech, Nick, we discussed a lot about AI, the investments that the Atlantic is making, and the trade-offs that you've considered when you've done partnerships. You said it really is all about the fair exchange in value, which is why you are working with Parata AI. You said that building AI ethics into a system on stolen data is not going to be possible, and I think the rubber will meet the road eventually in court with a lot of these AI companies around that. We talked about the economics of partnering with a tech firm. You said there were a lot of companies creating things for Facebook. Like, of course, Facebook or any AI company or any tech company could pull the rug out from underneath you. That's a risk that one would take. Frank, you said creators really don't like Facebook, which I thought was very interesting. Oh, TikTok, sorry. And that they want their own relationships with their data and that they want their own relationships with their audiences. You said that you are not in the position to decide on free speech. Users want optionality. And then the last thing, I think just hearing you speak about how you value TikTok is super interesting. So the US arm, you say, is about 8% of the company. And so you think your $20 billion bid is probably about right in terms of how you see the value. I won't.
Don't forget that Nick's going to eat his shoe.
And Nick will eat his shoe. And congrats on 2 million users for Project Liberty. That's incredible. I want to thank everyone that came out tonight to support this conversation around free press and democracy. I want to thank More Insights and Strategies, Futurum, thank you for being here and supporting us, and of course Qualcomm, and to the folks at Axios for allowing me to have this opportunity, and to all of you for coming out. Thank you.